I really liked doing my A-level dance. I really enjoyed it. I had some amazing teachers who were just so lovely and the best. And I know that lots of people either don't like or quite struggle with their theory. And that was actually for me one of my favourite parts of the course. I loved learning about dance, and I loved just like watching Jerome Robbins videos in my bed, just being like, I'm working, but I'm just watching videos of West Side Story. I wanted to give you a couple of little tips and tricks that might help you, because I know that A-level's coming up and that's the very stressful time, and I hope you are all okay. These tips can be applied to both GCSE and A-level dance, so GCSEers, make your way in. These little tips are just very, very broad, general things. If you want me to go in more detail, tell me, loves, because I'm good like that. And when I was doing my A-levels, the way I used to think about it when answering dance questions was in 3 parts. These are for like the long answer questions where you have to go into more detail and analyse things, not like just the short answer questions where it's like, give us a description of Lady Jane. I'm like, yeah, Lady Jane was a lady. A star. I like to split these questions into 3 parts, almost like point, evidence, explain. I'm going to call them content, description, and analysis. Content. Content I like to think about is the facts, the information that you need to learn about your dance practitioners, about Rambert Dance Company, about the work Rooster. That's all of those things, all the background information basically. One way that I found that really helped me learn my content was I created these things called revision Bibles. So within these Bibles I would do a short overview of who they were, what the most important things were about them as choreographers, when they were creating work, like what works they created, just the basic information. Then I would do a complete timeline of their lives, highlighting the most important parts of their lives. It's important to remember when you're learning things about their timelines and about their lives, try and pick out the most important things that you think you'll be able to use for questions. For example, Jerome Robbins. He studied for 6 months at NYU as a chemistry major, but then he dropped out. Although that's an important piece of information to know because that's just part of his timeline. However, after he left NYU, he then went on to have an apprenticeship with Gluck Sandor. Now that's a bit of information that you can use that you could actually apply to a question. It's also just useful for knowing where works fit into their timeline. That means you can also talk about how their style developed. The next thing I will put in my revision Bible would be style. That would be the key features of their dances. So, for example, that Chrissy Bruce uses. Why do I call him Chrissy Bruce? Is really influenced by the music that he loves to use for his time. He uses a lot of popular music in his dances, or that Richard Alston is much more about movement for movement's sake. Jerome Robbins and his kick. I'm trying to think of more contemporary. Martha Graham and her bursting out of a blanket. I don't know that much about Martha Graham. The next thing I would put in my little Bible would be the influences of each choreographer. Again, that can be a number of things. That can be literal people. I would put when they were working with them, what did they do as a choreographer, what did they do as a practitioner, and what your practitioner that you're studying took from that influence. But it can also be stuff like music, it can be stuff like social dance.
Anything really that inspired your choreographer to create the work that they were creating.
I'd also talk about what the practitioner's influence was. I would say with quotes, try and pick quotes that are memorable but also can be used for a lot of different questions. And do some extended reading, look into what critics have said about their work and just pick out maybe 3 quotes for each practitioner. 3 really important things that you could use for multiple questions. The final thing I'd put in my Bible is just about the works. Obviously with Rooster you kind of just need to know that inside out. It's a bit tough. I would really, really recommend just making sure that for each dance in Rooster, make sure you have movement examples for every single dance, because you never know what you might be asked about. I think it's also a good idea to make your own questions. Think from the perspective of an examiner, like what could they possibly ask you? Anyway, second section, description. So this would be your movement examples. Movement examples are really important. I'm going to be a parrot for your teachers probably. Action, space, dynamic. Always action, space, dynamic. Make sure in every single movement example you make, action, space, dynamic. if you don't know what that means. So let's do a movement like this. It's a wave. Obviously it's a wave. But to get the higher marks, what you want to be doing is fully describing the wave. So the girl in the black jumper softly waves her hand from left to right, holding it in front of her face while she sits on the ground making a video.
Could have improved this even further by saying I was sat centre stage.
Try and pick interesting, memorable examples. What I mean by this, interesting, things that you can pull a lot out of. So, for example, if someone is simply doing a hop across the stage, there's not really much you can pull from that apart from maybe something about the choreographer's dynamic style. If you picked, maybe I'll take an example from Ghost Dances. So dance, the one where she's mourning and she goes 1 2 3 1 2 3 step popper nova. We've loads to talk about with that example. So it shows Christopher Bruce's use of repetition. On the second time through, 2 more dancers join in, so it shows the element of Christopher Bruce's style. It's also very emotional and dramatic, so it shows the influence of Martha Graham. What else can I say about that movement example? There's so much. You can talk about how she's reaching out, how it could be representative of her reaching for a brighter future, her emotional torment, her in distress, her grieving. There's loads and loads and loads you can talk about there. It's also useful to pick interesting movement examples because it makes it more interesting for the examiner. It's being individual and having an individual take on it. I think it's also useful to try and have versatile examples. By this I mean examples that you can use for multiple questions. So taking the example of the Martha Graham one I just used, you can use it for an example about repetition, you can use it for an example about emotion, you can use it for an example about influences. There's loads and loads of things you can use that one motif for. Final thing I want to talk about today is analysis of content. Content, this is where the stuff that you'd do if you did it in your revision Bible or you did it when you were learning the content. You can use that stuff in your analysis. So you took the grooming gestures of Rooster. You can then analyse that further by adding in some social context about 1960s culture at the time, that it was a male chauvinistic society, all that good sort of stuff. But then you can go further into analysing the detail of the movement, how the checking of the outfits and the grooming not only reflects the egotistical nature of the men, but also could relate to the way in which animals groom themselves, suggesting further that men in the society are even more so like the rooster. Christopher Bruce there is making a comparison between the men in society as both roosters or other animals. Just a tiny little thing about paragraph structure, just to hone off the video. You want to be making sure that in your paragraphs, the analysis is the bulk of your content. And in your analysis you can talk about loads and loads and loads of things. You can talk about like influences from society, influences from history, influences from other people, stylistic features. You can add all that stuff in, and then you can also put in your own personal analysis, which is something that I really love to do. And when you're doing that, make sure you're being very, very interesting. Be interesting.
Welcome to the future. There was one thing that I wanted to add. Whatever you do, you relate it to the question. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your descriptions are. It doesn't matter how much analysis you go into. If it doesn't relate to the question, if you get asked a question on influence and you start talking about the stylistic creatures of Christopher Bruce, you won't get the marks at the end of the day, and that will be really upsetting because you all deserve great marks and you all deserve A stars. If you would like more, I will happily go into more detail about this because I freaking love dance. So tell us, give us a little buzz to what you're struggling with. I will happily help. Auntie Hannah is here to save the day. Best of luck. I hope you're okay. Don't stress yourselves out. Right, my loves. Thank you next. I'm going. Bye.